Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a place where winter isn't just a season, it's a lifestyle. A landscape of long nights, lava fields, and the kind of cold that makes your eyelashes freeze together. That's right, we're talking about medieval Iceland, a land where the darkness wasn't just outside your window, it was inside your home, seeping into every moss-stuffed crevice of your turf roof. Imagine this. You're tucked beneath a heavy wool blanket in a home built partly into a hillside. The walls are made of stacked stone. The ceiling is held up with driftwood beams scavenged from a beach a month's ride away, and there isn't a single candle in sight. Why? Because Iceland doesn't have trees. Not really. Not enough, at least, to go wasting them on luxury items like wax and wicks. You probably won't survive this if you like mood lighting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up a gravel path, your feet slipping slightly on half-frozen mud. There's no lamp to guide you. Just the moon, low and bloated, and the wind that whips off the sea like it's got something to prove. As you reach the low wooden door and duck inside, a wave of earthy warmth hits you: peat smoke, sheep, old stone, and a faint oily tang that never really leaves the room. Inside the turf house, it's dim, not pitch black, but certainly not what you'd call well lit. A single glow glimmers from a concave stone bowl near the hearth. No candles, no torches, no flaming chandeliers. What you're seeing is more like a small, oily puddle burning quietly with a low blue-orange flame. Welcome to the world of medieval Icelandic lighting. Candles, real wax candles, were rare. Not just rare, exotic, imported, expensive, and strictly reserved for churches, monasteries, and the painfully wealthy. If you saw a candle burning in someone's home, it wasn't because they were reading poetry, it was because someone important had died. And this was now a wake. Instead, people relied on what nature grudgingly offered them. And Iceland's nature? It's more lava than luxury. No great forest to harvest. No bees to produce wax in great supply. What they did have, in plenty, were animals, especially sheep, and driftwood, and wind. Lots of wind. So homes were built into the earth to protect against that wind. Thick turf walls insulated like a dream, but they didn't help with visibility. Once the sun set, and in winter, that happened by 3 p.m., you were reliant on anything that would burn or glow or even vaguely smolder. Driftwood was precious and usually safe for furniture, not fire. The peat dug from wetlands was excellent for heating but terrible for illumination. It produced a lot of smoke and not much flame. So families had to get creative. Historians still argue whether the scarcity of lighting was more about material limitations or cultural norms. Did Icelanders simply adapt to darkness because they had to? Or did they actually prefer it, a kind of practical stoicism, a way of embracing the long northern nights as a natural rhythm? The truth is probably somewhere in between. When your options are limited, your expectations shrink. Eventually, you stop chasing brightness and learn to make friends with the gloom. It's not to say people stumbled around in darkness all winter. Rather, they developed a kind of low-light lifestyle. Eyes adjusted. Tasks were timed. People did what they needed to during the bright hours, what little there were. And when night came, they settled close to the hearth and made the most of the flickering glow from whatever was available to burn. And that was rarely elegant. Because in Iceland, elegance was something you scraped off your boots before coming. Inside. Instead of wax candles, Icelanders used what some researchers call fat lamps. These were small bowls often made of soapstone or carved lava rock filled with animal fat or oil. A tiny piece of moss or twisted wool served as the wick. The result? A small, steady flame that produced more smoke than light, but it was enough to see your bowl of fish stew, or find the edge of your sleeping platform, or perhaps sew another patch onto your already heavily patched trousers. One visitor in the paw. 1700s described an Icelandic house at night as a place lit by ghosts, and that's honestly not far off. Shadows loomed large. Corners stayed mysterious. And if you thought something moved just out of the corner of your eye, well, maybe it did. Iceland is, after all, a place with a long tradition of elves. There's a reason so many Icelandic folk tales involve things that happen in the dark, but we're not there yet. You're still inside, adjusting your eyes, sitting near that modest flame. There's a bench along the wall, fur-covered and worn smooth by generations of tired people. A low table holds a bowl of skyr, a hunk of barley bread, and a knife shaped like a flattened fish hook. You can smell the smoke in your hair already, and above it all, the feeling that this dim, low flickering space isn't just survival. It's tradition, not the kind you learn in books. The kind you live because your grandmother did, and her grandmother, and hers, all the way back to a time when the Vikings first built longhouses on these shores, in land where darkness stretches. For weeks you don't fight it, you fold into it, one flickering flame at a time. You wake up to the sound of sloshing, a low, wet glugging, followed by the soft creak of a wooden spoon against stone. Somewhere nearby, someone's preparing the morning light source, and no, that doesn't mean opening the curtains. In this house, as in many Icelandic homes centuries ago, you don't light candles in the morning. You stir blubber. You rub the stiffness from your neck and crawl out from under your thick woolen blanket. The air is still cold and scented with a strange mix of wet ash, lanolin, and something you can only describe as seafood adjacent. You tug your cloak tight and move toward the hearth. There's your host, a wiry old man with eyebrows like frost-covered lichens leaning over a bowl of whale oil. He dips a thin strip of dried moss into it, lets it soak, and then, with a practiced motion, sets the wick into a shallow stone dish. A moment later, the flame stutters to life, crackling softly like a whispering fireplace. Welcome to the magical world of burning marine mammal fat. It's not glamorous. It's not scented. It absolutely is not clean. But it works, and in medieval Iceland, that's all that matters. Whale oil, along with seal fat and fish liver oil, was a vital part of domestic lighting. And if you're cringing at the thought of the smell good, you should be, because it was bad. Really bad. Imagine old butter left out on a rock during midsummer, stirred with a handful of seaweed, and then set on fire. That's your nightlight. But here's the thing, there were no other good options. When you live on an island of glaciers and volcanoes, you use what the sea gives you. And the sea gives you whales. Historians still argue whether the Icelanders actively hunted whales during the Middle Ages or simply harvested the carcasses that washed ashore. Either way, the blubber was treasured. It could be eaten in hard times, traded with neighboring farms, rendered for soap, and most relevantly, used to produce light. You glance down at your own hands and realize there's a fine sheen of grease across your fingers. The light, though small, radiates heat. And that's a gift you don't ignore in a turf house with one shared bed platform and no chimney. You sit at the bench and eat your breakfast barley porridge. Thin skyr, maybe a pickled fish if you're lucky, all under the faint golden haze of burning whale. The flame dances quietly, no more than a thumb's height above the dish, and its reflection warps on the soot-blackened wall behind it. The walls themselves seem to absorb the light. They're made of stone and dirt, and every crevice is stuffed with moss and horsehair to keep out the wind. There are no windows, or if there are, They're no larger than a soup bowl and glazed with stretched animal membrane. In short, there's nowhere for light to bounce. You're not filling the room. You're illuminating a tiny pool of space just wide enough for your hands and your spoon. If you want more light, well, light more fat. It's a simple system, but not without effort. Someone has to render the oil from the blubber. That means boiling hunks of greasy flesh over an open flame until it separates into thick liquid and stringy meat. The smell is enough to clear a village, or at least give them something to complain about for a month. But once it's done, the oil is stored in clay jars, wooden casks, or even sealed fish bladders. Refillable, portable, and terribly flammable. And, like many Icelandic things, lighting wasn't just about function, it was about economy. Whale oil could be traded, even bartered for things like wool, cheese, or fishing tools. It was a currency of sorts, dripping and slow burning. There's a record from a 14th century Icelandic farmstead that mentions whale oil being used to mark the holy days with light, which suggests that the community didn't burn it nightly, but saved it for sacred or significant moments. A flickering dish of whale oil might signal a name day celebration, a birth, or, perhaps more ominously, a vigil during a winter illness. And illnesses, you learn, are particularly troublesome here. The dampness clings to your joints. The cold bites at your toes even near the fire. People stay in bed not out of laziness but out of necessity. To get up before sunrise in December is not noble, it's suspicious behavior. The whale lamp becomes not just your light, but your companion. The way some people talk to their houseplants, Icelanders may have whispered to their lamps, urging the flame to stay strong, just a little longer. You stare at the flickering dish on the hearthstone. It's modest, but steady. A small circle of heat and glow in an otherwise dark world. You imagine a child leaning close to it with a carved bone needle, sewing a mitten by firelight, or a grandmother murmuring a lullaby with one hand stretched toward the flame. As though warming a memory, whale oil wasn't romantic, but it was constant. The great irony? That despite all the effort, all the stink, and all the ritual, the oil lamps were wildly inefficient. They smoked. They sputtered. They left stains on the ceiling beams and slick patches on the floor. Sometimes the wick slipped and doused the whole lamp in its own fuel. Sometimes it just went out and you had to start over. But still every night, someone made the effort. Because in a world where darkness can last for months, even the smallest light becomes a celebration. You finish your porridge. The flame flickers once, then steadies. Outside, the wind hisses over the thatch. But inside, you are lit by fish, by history, by a flame that smells like low tide and perseverance. You reach for your cloak again, this time to shield yourself from the draft coming through the turf wall near the door. The flame is holding steady, but the wind outside howls like a thing with teeth. You tighten the wool at your neck and glance at the object hanging above the hearth. A fish. More precisely, a dried cod. Suspended upside down by a loop of twine, stiff as a board and twice as grim. And no, it's not dinner. It's a lamp. You tilt your head, wondering if this is some kind of medieval joke. But no, it's real. That fish is about to become firelight. The cod lamp is one of those strange Icelandic inventions that sits somewhere between survival and surrealism. Essentially, it's a dried fish soaked in oil, usually seal, sometimes whale, then partially lit at one end. It smolders more than it flames, giving off a low, steady glow and an aroma that can only be described as smoke despair. You watch your host take down the fish, cradle it like a precious scroll, and touch the oily end to the stone hearth where the blubber lamp still burns. There's a moment of hesitation, a few puffs of breath, and then a low flicker. The cod catches, and there it is, a lamp. Made of fish. Historians still argue whether these so-called fish lamps were commonplace or rare. Some believe they were used primarily along the coasts, where fish were abundant and oil was easy to render. Others suggest they were a novelty less about practicality and more about showing off one's ingenuity. You know, a sort of look what I can do with a haddock moment. But here, in this house, it's just another tool. Another way to carve light from the living world. You crouch beside the cod lamp and inhale. The smell is exactly what you feared: oily, acrid, and faintly mournful. It's not quite burning, not quite rotting. It simply exists, giving off a dull yellow glow that pulses like a sleeping creature. The edges of the fish curl in on themselves. As they char, the light is uneven, casting long, broken shadows on the turf wall. Your own hand, held up before your face, becomes monstrous fingers, exaggerated and wavering. This isn't light for reading or writing. It's light for survival, for seeing just enough, for not walking into the goat pen by accident. It's easy to forget, in a world of LEDs and adjustable hue smart bulbs, that illumination wasn't always about brightness. It was about direction. You didn't need the whole room lit. You needed your feet visible, your hands, the face of the person next to you. Light was intimate, personal, and often quite literally smelly. Some cod lamps, you learn, were improved by wrapping the dried fish in linen soaked in oil. The cloth helped catch flame and burn longer, more cleanly. Others were mounted on thin wooden stakes and placed into small piles of stones to act like crude torch stands. The wealthier households, by which we mean the families with a second goat, might burn multiple fish at once for festive occasions. You're not sure what kind of festival that would be, but you can imagine the scent. Despite the odor, the cod lamp burns surprisingly well. There's a kind of charm to it. A gentle crackling, the faint hiss of rendered oil bubbling in tiny pockets beneath the skin. You sit back down at the bench and warm your hands, not on the flame itself, but on the idea of it, that something as mundane as a dried fish can be transformed into warmth and light. Across the room, your host unrolls a sheepskin bundle and removes a few more items. A bone, spoon, a carved wooden comb, a bit of bread wrapped in moss. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The fire speaks. The cod speaks. This is a place where the objects do most of the talking, and while the lamp sputters, you think of other places, castles in France where wax chandeliers blaze above banquet tables, palaces in Cairo with hanging glass lanterns. And here, in Iceland, a single fish burning softly in the dark. That contrast doesn't feel sad. It feels intentional. Icelanders didn't live like this because they didn't know better. They lived like this because they knew what worked. You don't demand marble when basalt will do. You don't yearn for beeswax when fish guts are closer, and there's something soothing in that. Something deeply logical, even beautiful, about shaping your needs to match your environment instead of the other way around. You wonder, briefly, how many things in your own life are brighter than they need to be, louder, flashier. Maybe the Icelanders were onto something. Maybe simplicity really does shine, especially when it's made of salted cod and stubborn hope. Your host rises, hangs another fish near the hearth for tomorrow's lighting, and shuffles toward the back of the room. You're left alone with the cod lamp, the mossy walls, and the comforting knowledge that here, in the middle of nowhere, someone figured out how to turn dinner into a lantern. You don't need candles. You have fish. You shift your seat on the wooden bench and catch a small puff of soot falling from the ceiling. It lands softly on your wool sleeve, a gray reminder of just how much of this home is built not just of stone and turf but of smoke. Not that you mind. In a house like this, smoke is warmth. Smoke is survival. And, more often than not, smoke is your primary indoor companion during the long Icelandic night. Tonight, The glow isn't coming from a cod. It's something even richer. Sheep. Tallow. Rendered from the thick fat of animals you know by name, because they sleep under the same roof you do. Tallow is the substance that defined countless Icelandic winters. You watch your host's daughter, a girl maybe 10 or 11, scoop out a thick, pale lump of tallow from a horn container. She moves carefully, balancing the grease on a flat-bone spatula, and drops it into the small stone lamp near the hearth. The wick, a bit of twisted sheep's wool, already sits ready in the shallow groove. Within seconds, the flame returns, a low, steady tongue of fire, dancing just high enough to illuminate the family's hands as they sort through a basket of dried herbs. It's not a bright light, but it's a kind one. Soft and buttery, with a warm golden hue that makes the stone walls look less like a cave and more like a sanctuary. And then the smell hits you. If the cod lamp was smoked fish sadness, the sheep tallow lamp is more like meat pie in decline. It's not awful, but it's unmistakably animal. The fat gives off a warm, savory aroma as it burns, laced with a faint musk that clings to the air like a wet wool cloak. It's the smell of dinners past, of shearing days, of barnyard lullabies. Whispered to lambs, you realize somewhat uncomfortably that everyone in this house smells faintly of it. Their clothes, their hair, probably their dreams. Historians still argue whether sheep tallow was more commonly used for lighting or cooking, but here, there's no such distinction. One pot of fat might light the house in the evening, fry cakes in the morning, and grease your boots in between. It's a one-substance-fits-all lifestyle. Of course, sheep tallow had its drawbacks. It burned dirty. The flame smoked quickly if left untended, leaving sooty trails along the walls and blackened rings around the lamp bowls. The wicks, too, needed frequent trimming. If they burned too long without adjustment, the smoke would fill the low ceilings. House like a creeping fog, causing coughs and streaming eyes. But even so, it was preferred over more delicate options like fish oil, simply because it was abundant and familiar. Every farm had sheep. Every sheep had fat. And fat meant light. You lean closer and inspect the lamp's bowl. It's carved from soapstone, soft to the touch and veined with subtle patterns that catch the light beautifully. Despite the roughness of life here, there's care in this object. Someone smoothed its edges, carved a small swirl along the rim, and added a shallow groove for the wick to sit just right. It's functional, but also lovely, and it's a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, humans make room for grace, for comfort, for a little elegance, even if it smells like roasted mutton. A child sets down a bundle of dried leaves near the lamp. Arctic thyme and angelica, herbs prized both for flavor and for keeping the air fresh. You're not sure it helps much with the tallow smoke, but it's a valiant effort. Nearby, a pair of wool mittens hangs from a wooden peg to dry. You watch a woman, maybe the girl's mother, reach up to flip them, muttering something under her breath about the soot. She smacks the cuffs gently, and a fine layer of black dust falls away. That dust? It's from the lamp. It's everywhere. On shelves, on hair, in food. But no one complains. It's simply part of life here, like frost or sheep or stubborn relatives. You breathe it in, feel it settle on your skin, and somehow ... It's not unpleasant. Just another texture in a very textured world. The tallow lamp flickers. Someone reaches out to adjust the wick with a pinched piece of birch bark, darkened from past use. The light strengthens, sharpens, then softens again. You realize that tending to the lamp isn't just a task. It's a rhythm, a ritual, like stirring soup or turning pages. It's part of the soundtrack of the Icelandic night. You listen for a moment. There's the crackle of the lamp, the soft whisper of wool rubbing against wool, a muted cough, a shuffle of someone shifting on a sheepskin, all held together by that one little flame dot. It's strange to think how central it is, how many conversations happen by it, how many children fall asleep watching its glow, how many stories are told. With its flickering shapes dancing across a wall, the light doesn't just let people see, it lets them be together. And maybe that's why no one here minds the smell, or the soot, or the effort, because this light, this greasy, smelly, flickering flame, it means you're home. You're sitting now on a low wooden bench, its surface worn smooth by countless rears that came before yours. When you begin to truly take in your surroundings, the lamp you've been watching, the one filled with sheep tallow tucked neatly beside a stone hearth, casts its familiar golden glow, but it doesn't reach the far corners of the room. There's light, yes, but it's selective. A spotlight in a play where the cast never quite steps fully on stage. This is the reality of medieval, Icelandic homes. Most of your living space lives in shadow. You glance upward, where low wooden beams hold up the ceiling, blackened with years of lamp smoke. Above that, layers of turf and stone trap what little heat the hearth produces. Your eyes, now well adjusted to the dimness, begin to see things you didn't before. A pair of wooden shoes beneath a pile of hay, a ladle hanging from a nail in the wall, a row of tiny carved spoons laid out like sleeping birds. But what's striking isn't what you can see, it's how much is left unseen. A candle would flood a space like this with a sharp, all-revealing brightness. These lamps, they suggest, they hint, they leave room for mystery, for silence, for sleep. And when you think about it, maybe that's what makes this place so restful. The modern world bombards us with light overhead, underfoot, behind screens, and above mirrors. But here, the darkness is part of the architecture. It's not a flaw. It's a feature. These homes weren't designed for illumination. They were designed for insulation, for survival. You begin to notice how intentional the darkness is. The central hearth is the glowing heart of the home, but everything radiates out from it in fading degrees. Closest to the fire, people, tools, warmth, life. Further out, storage, beds, bundles of hay, maybe a brooding hen if she's having a rough winter. Farthest away, the walls, the places where ghosts and drafty memories tend to loiter. It's all very practical. And yet, there's an elegance to it. You walk quietly to the far corner of the room. Here, just beneath a wooden rafter, you find another light source entirely. Not a lamp, not a flame. A slow, soft shimmer, barely there. At first you think, your eyes are playing tricks on you, but no, it's real. A faint greenish glow. From moss. Glowing moss. You lean closer. There it is, a patch of luminous lichen nestled into the crevice of a damp log, its tiny filaments pulsing with natural phosphorescence. It's subtle, eerie, and oddly comforting. Now, to be clear, not all moss glows. And most historians believe the use of glowing moss in medieval Icelandic homes was more of a myth, or at least an exaggeration passed down through folktales. But you're not here to split hairs. You're here to enjoy the ambience. And what an ambience it is. In this little moss-lined crevice, nature becomes nightlight. Whether placed there intentionally or allowed to grow over years of damp silence, the moss provides just enough glow to distinguish the wall from the abyss. In some households, they say moss was harvested from lava fields and tucked into woven pouches hung near beds for comfort. Was it superstition? Was it necessity? Historians still argue. But here, the result is undeniable. A gentle glow where none should be. You let your eyes drift along the walls now, searching for other signs of creative lighting. Near the hearth, you spot a bone mounted with a hollowed-out channel filled with tallow. At the back of the room, there's a bowl lined with polished stone chips that reflect the lamp's glow, just enough to give the illusion of depth. Elsewhere, someone has tucked tiny slivers of fish scale into the chinks of the wall, decorative, yes, but also faintly reflective in a very Icelandic kind of way. You sit again. Now you see the room not just as a space, but as a constellation. Points of light here and there, scattered like stars across a low sky. Each flame, each shimmer, each glow tiny orbs in an otherwise enveloping dark. You understand why people huddled together, not just for warmth, but for visibility. Why stories were told close to the fire, why laughter was reserved for the hearthside, and why sleep came early. Because beyond the light, the dark was total. You didn't challenge it. You adapted to it. And somehow, that makes everything feel slower, softer, less urgent. You lie back now, resting your head on a thick wool cushion. The flicker of the tallow lamp dances across the ceiling beams, casting long shadows like giants walking through smoke. Somewhere behind you, a sheep shifts in its pen, content to share its body heat with the humans who feed it. You close your eyes, just for a moment. You imagine living here not as a guest, but as someone born into it. A child learning to trim a wick without scorching their fingers. A teenager tasked with rendering fat before the next storm. A parent coaxing a stubborn flame to life while the wind screams just beyond the turf. These aren't grand stories. There are no kings here, no armies, no sweeping romances. Just the quiet triumph of a single room, kept warm and barely lit, by hands that know exactly what they're doing. And that might be the most comforting thing of all. It's the middle of the night now, at least you think it is. Time in this house is less of a schedule and more of a suggestion. The lamps have been trimmed, the fire fed, and most of the household has drifted into that particular Icelandic version of sleep that's somewhere between a nap and hibernation. Except for one person. You open your eyes just enough to see her, a small figure, wrapped in a thick cloak of russet wool, rising from her bed platform. She moves silently, barefoot on packed earth, and makes her way to the hearth. She carries a shallow stone dish in one hand and a pinch of wool in the other. This is the light keeper. Every home had one, usually a child or the youngest person in the household, whose job it was to maintain the flame throughout the night. Not all homes had someone designated with this title, but in places where relighting a fire from scratch could take an hour and half your patience, it made sense to keep a low flame burning rather than risk letting it die. She crouches by the hearth, her face illuminated by the faint blue-orange flicker of the sheep tallow lamp. Her eyes are sleepy but focused. With one hand, she adds a twist of new wool to the pool of warm fat. With the other, she lifts a small hooked stick used to adjust the wick and gently tugs the smoking end upright. The flame wavers, then steadies. The light strengthens just slightly. She doesn't smile or speak or look around for praise. She simply watches for another moment to make sure the lamp has caught, then sits back, legs folded under her like a cat. You imagine she's done this dozens of times, maybe hundreds. The same careful movements, the same sleepy silence. She's not a servant, not exactly. Just someone who was asked to help. And in this part of the world, that's a powerful thing. Everyone helps, or nothing works. Historians still argue whether the role of the light keeper was formal or fluid. Some records suggest it was passed from older siblings to younger, while others imply that whoever happened to wake up first took the duty by default. But one thing is clear, lamps didn't tend themselves, and someone always had to care. The girl sits for a moment, warming her fingers over the bowl of light. Her face is dappled with shadow, her cheeks rosy from the cold. She leans forward, blows gently on the wick to chase away the soot, then places a small flat stone on the hearth as a barrier to keep curious animals or equally curious toddlers from tipping the lamp. Then she rises, As quietly as she came out as she returns to the sleeping platform, you notice something in her hand, a tiny bone figurine, maybe a fox or a horse. She tucks it under the blanket with her. A comfort item perhaps, or a reward for her effort. In either case, it's clear she's not expecting thanks. The warmth from the lamp is thanks enough. You look around the room now with new eyes. You notice a second lamp tucked near a workbench and a third nestled on a shelf above the bed. Small pools of light, not connected to any switch or socket, just quiet, living flames tended with care. Each lamp carries a kind of personality. One leans to the left, its wick stubborn and sputtering. Another burns strong, fed with extra fat. A third flickers lazily, like it might fall asleep itself. And that's the thing about these lamps, they require relationship. You don't just light them and walk away. You feed them, tend them, trim their wicks and clean their bowls. Like a pet that occasionally sets your curtains on fire, you begin to see why the role of lightkeeper might be a source of pride. Not just a chore, but a responsibility. A way of keeping the house alive. You also begin to understand why sleep was so different in medieval Iceland. With the need to feed lamps, rotate fuel, and stoke embers, sleep was rarely a solid 8 hours. Instead, it came in cycles. First sleep, then wakefulness, then second sleep. A rhythm guided less by clocks and more by flame. During that waking period, usually sometime after midnight, people did quiet tasks, sewing, praying, stretching. Sometimes whispering to one another in the dark, voices soft enough not to wake the whole household. The light was low, the world still. This in-between time, historians say, was when dreams were discussed, worries voiced, and small decisions made. The flame was always there, listening, flickering. Back near the hearth, the lamp has begun to dim again. Not dangerously, just a gentle slump as the wick curls and shrinks. You wonder if someone will wake to fix it, or if the little girl will stir again, her bone fox in one hand and her lamp hook in the other. Either way, you don't worry. The flame won't go out. Not here, because someone always rises to keep it burning. Morning arrives slowly in Iceland, not in a burst of golden light, but as a polite suggestion that the darkness might consider thinning just a little. It's not even quite day, not by the standards you're used to. But inside the turf house, things are beginning to stir. The lamps, having burned all night, are now mostly puddles of hardened fat. The hearth is a nest of gray ash with a few stubborn embers still clinging to life. And the girl, the lightkeeper, is fast asleep again, her tiny bone figurine cradled in one hand. You stretch your limbs beneath the heavy wool blanket and watch as a woman, probably the mother, moves quietly toward the fire. She has a bundle of dry moss tucked under one arm, and in her other hand, a pair of iron tongs holding a glowing coal pulled from the ashes. She squats at the hearth, presses the moss gently into a small stone bowl, and waits. There's no rush, no panic. The ember will either catch or it won't. But if it does, and it usually does, she'll coax it into flame the same way her mother did, and her grandmother, and probably someone whose name is now lost to the moss itself. And this is where we arrive at another ancient Icelandic art, saving fire. You see? In a land where lighting a fire from scratch was inconvenient on a good day and borderline impossible during a storm, the real skill was not igniting but preserving. Embers from last night's fire were as precious as silver. If they died out, you couldn't just strike a match. You had to create a new fire using flint and steel. Or worse, hope someone nearby had something burning you could borrow. So, Icelanders became masters of ember preservation. The woman blows softly into the moss bundle. A curl of smoke lifts like a ribbon, and then, yes, there it is, a tiny flame, shy and pale, born from yesterday's warmth. She adds a twist of sheep wool, a few strands of dried bark, and within seconds the flame strengthens, hungry now, eager to become hearth again. Historians still debate how widely this practice was used across the island. Some believe every household passed down specific ember-saving techniques, while others argue it was more instinct than instruction, a survival skill learned by watching and repetition. What's not debated is the result. Icelanders, like many cultures with limited resources, got very, very good at keeping fire alive. You remember reading that some households used carved soapstone boxes to cradle embers overnight, insulated with ash or moss. Others buried small coals in troughs of peat to keep them smoldering beneath the surface until morning. And some especially creative souls wrapped glowing coals in seaweed and placed them in hollowed ram horns, portable fire starters, ready. At a moment's notice, now you lean closer to the hearth, breathing in the sharp scent of reawakening smoke. It's not pleasant, but it's honest. The kind of smell that says, "This fire is earned." And in a place like medieval Iceland, you earned everything. The woman feeds the growing flame with a few slivers of driftwood, her face calm and patient. She isn't in a hurry to get the whole room warm, it's about re-establishing the heart of the home. Once the fire is going, the rest can follow. Breakfast, chores, maybe even singing, if the wind isn't too loud today. You glance at the walls and spot something curious. A line of small, dark handprints along one timber beam. Soot marks from countless mornings just like this, where someone reached up to adjust a lamp or leaned too close to the ceiling while poking the fire. These aren't just stains, they're signatures. An archive of survival. And while we're on the topic of fire and survival, let's not forget one final Icelandic trick. Carrying the flame when traveling between homes, which in a landscape of snowdrifts and sheep trails could take hours. People often brought fire with them, literally, tucked into a fire horn or wrapped in sheep's wool. A small ember could ride for miles, protected from wind and damp. It was your insurance policy against arriving at a friend's home only to find their fire had gone out too. You imagine it now, a figure trudging across a frozen field, fur-lined cloak flapping in the wind, one hand gripping a small pouch that holds not coins or food, but glow. Not fire, not flame, just possibility. The ember that could mean the difference between a warm meal and a long night with nothing but your own breath for comfort. Because that's what these lamps and fires really were, not just sources of light, but promises. The promise that night would not last forever, that the cold would not win, that someone somewhere would always tend the flame. You watch now as the woman lights the day's first tallow lamp with the new fire. The wick catches quickly. She turns to the sleeping forms on the bed platform and says nothing. There's no need. The light is speaking for her. Now that the flame has been rekindled, the day truly begins, not with a trumpet or a rooster, but with the familiar scent of burning tallow wafting through the air. You sit up slowly, stretch your arms, and take stock of the room once more. The shadows are lighter now, though not gone. Light in Iceland, especially during winter, is more of a softening of the dark than a reversal. The lamp on the central table flickers, beside a wooden bowl filled with dried berries and grain. A small knife rests beside it, and you notice that the blade is coated in soot, not from use, but from proximity. Everything here, no matter how well cared for, wears a patina of smoke and shadow. Then comes the smell. This one's new. Not tallow, not moss. It's cod oil again. But this time it's been warmed, not lit. Used not as a lamp, but as a softener. A salve. A cleaner, if you can believe it. The man of the house, his back bent like a bow from years of tending sheep, sits near the hearth with a rough cloth in one hand and a shallow bowl of warm cod liver oil in the other. He's dipping the cloth, than wiping down a piece of carved bone, perhaps a needle case or a flute. The oil coats the surface, keeping the cold from cracking it. And yes, making it shine just enough to remind everyone that this household may be poor in candles, but its rich in ingenuity cod liver oil served many purposes here. Yes, it burned, but it also preserved. Wood, bone, skin, and leather all benefited from its stubborn, greasy embrace. In some homes it was mixed with soot to make a crude polish. In others it was rubbed into boots to keep out the damp. And once, in a particularly unforgettable mistake, it was used to slick a child's hair on a festival day. That child still shows up in village songs. You glance at the lamp again, now competing with a new contender, an oil pan, shallow and wide, balanced on 3 stones. It doesn't look like much, but the surface ripples faintly with heat. Above it, fish skins have been strung on a wooden frame, drying, curing, possibly becoming windows. Or shoes, or something less obvious. What's clear is that the house is alive now. There's movement, muttering, the gentle scrape of tools. And throughout it all, the lamps remain steady-fed with cod oil, sheep tallow, or in one case, a lump of what might be rendered puffin fat. No one's admitting it. You move to the corner and spot a small shelf where several vessels are lined up. Each contains a different kind of oil, one dark and viscous, another pale and clear. The labels are scratched into bone, the script barely legible, but the meaning is obvious. This is a lighting library, a carefully curated collection of flammable options, each with its own scent, burn time, and behavior. You hold one up to the light, it's thick, almost waxy. Smells faintly of the sea and something medicinal. A mixture, perhaps? Historians still argue whether medieval Icelanders deliberately blended oils for better performance or simply used whatever was on hand and hoped for the best. Judging by the sheer number of variations, you suspect a little of both. What's fascinating is how personalized it all feels. In this house, you notice the oil is always poured into shallow stone bowls with chipped rims, easy to refill, easy to move. But you've heard that in other regions, people preferred carved horn or even tiny clay dishes shaped like fish. There's no standard model. Lighting in medieval Iceland wasn't a system, it was a style. One shaped by geography, tradition, and probably whatever broke last week and needed replacing. You return to the table where breakfast is underway. Bread, thin and flat. Skyr, tangy and thick. A slice of dried lamb. And beside it all, the lamp. Its light is low, but steady. Just enough to see your food, your neighbor's face, and the steam rising from your bowl. Pickle the dog, yes. Somehow he survived the century, sits at your feet, wrapped in his usual ridiculous shawl. He snorts once, then lays his head down with the kind of sigh that only small dogs and tired aristocrats can produce. You can't help but marvel at how central the lamps are to this rhythm. They're not simply sources of light. They're timekeepers, mood setters. The flicker of a lamp determines whether it's morning or still almost morning. Whether it's time to start the chores, or time for one more story by the fire. And stories, those thrive in this light dot in a world where the nearest town might be a 3-day walk and the written word is expensive. Storytelling becomes the entertainment, the education, and sometimes the therapy. And the lamp? It's the stage light, casting shadows on the wall that grow long and strange as tailies of trolls. Sea serpents and haunted rocks fill the room. You can see it happening now. The mother has sat back with her skyr bowl, a small boy at her side. She points to a spot above the hearth, where the soot has left a shape that vaguely resembles a face. That, she says in a hush, is where the night watcher lives. The boy gasps. Pickle snores. And you? You smile. Because here, In this half-lit room with its flickering cod oil and tallow lamps, you found something that transcends time. Warmth, story, shadow, light, all. From a little bowl of grease and a bit of moss. You step outside the turf house for a breath of morning air, expecting perhaps a sunrise, but no. The sky is gray. Not the kind of gray that promises a storm, but the heavy woolen kind that simply says, "This is it. This is what you get." There is light, technically, but not much. Enough to see the outline of the mountains far in the distance, to catch the glint of frost on the grass, to spot the slow puff of steam rising from the animals huddled in the paddock. But not enough to work by not without help. And so, back. Inside you go. The smell of the hearth welcomes you like an old friend wearing slightly too much sheep perfume. The tallow lamp is still lit, though its flame is smaller now, feeding on the dregs of yesterday's fat. Time to refill. Time to begin again. And as you return to the rhythm of the household, you start to notice something strange. The darkness never fully leaves. It hovers in corners, lurks behind shelves, clings to the ceiling beams like a second coat of paint. Iceland, even in its daytime hours, doesn't do bright. So what do you do in a world like this? You adapt. You structure your entire day around light or the lack of it. In medieval Iceland, the concept of day was flexible. Work began not when the sun rose, but when the room was light enough to function. That might mean starting your chores by lamp glow, or waiting until the snow outside reflected enough pale sky to filter through the membrane-covered window slits. It meant learning to sew in near darkness, or milk a sheep with one hand while holding a tiny bowl of burning fish oil in the other. There's even evidence that people practiced segmented sleep, 2 distinct sleep periods broken by a period of quiet wakefulness. A time for prayer, reflection, tending lamps, or just staring into the dark until your body agreed to go back to sleep. Historians still debate whether this segmented sleep was a cultural choice or simply a side effect of long winters and limited daylight. But most agree it gave people the flexibility to embrace both the dark and the light without needing to conquer either. You turn and watch as the household begins its quiet bustle. A boy scrapes the floor near the hearth with a flat wooden paddle, pushing last night's ashes into a corner. The mother is refilling a lamp with rendered seal fat, her hands moving confidently despite the stickiness. The father is squinting at a piece of rough parchment near the window, the script barely legible in the murk. And through it all, no one complains about the lack of light, because they've built a life around it. You find yourself drawn toward a small alcove, barely a shelf, really, where someone has placed a polished stone. Flat and circular, the surface gleams faintly. Next to it, a crude mirror made from burnished copper. It doesn't reflect much, just the suggestion of your shape, your movement. But that's enough. These tools were used to amplify the light, to take a tiny flame and stretch it just a little farther. In wealthier homes by Icelandic standards, lamps might be placed strategically near reflective stones or metal to bounce light into more useful spaces. It didn't work perfectly, but it helped. In one saga, a woman is described as having eyes that could find a needle by firelight. You believe it. Not because her eyes were magical, but because people here lived in dimness. They adapted. They practiced. Their pupils widened to dinner plate proportions. Their movements slowed. Their fingers learned to work by feel. They knew the difference between types of darkness. The blue dark of early morning, the golden dark of lamplit evening, the velvet black of a snowstorm's heart. You walk back toward the hearth, where the lamp has been refilled. It burns cleanly now, the fresh fat hissing gently. A basket sits beside it filled with lamp supplies, wicks, pieces of dried moss, carved driftwood ladles for scooping fat. It's not a toolkit. It's a lifeline, and nearby, on the wall, hangs something unexpected. A calendar, not a Roman calendar. Not even a Christian one, but an Icelandic winter count tally of weeks and weather signs, scratched onto a flat piece of driftwood with a piece of bone or charcoal. It records the passage of time not by dates, but by moments. First frost. Goats began to shed. Neighbor's chimney collapsed. Sun visible for 1 hour. It's part almanac, part diary, part prayer. And next to it, etched faintly but clearly, a drawing of a lamp. Even timekeeping in this place is bound to the flame. You sit again, bowl of warm grain in your lap, pickle at your feet, and the scent of lamp smoke curling around your nose. The room is alive. The light is low. The outside world may be gray and indistinct, but in here, the boundaries are sharp. Light defines the edges of the world. Not brightly, but enough. Later in the day, if you can call it that, you find yourself peering into a dim corner near the family's shared sleeping platform. There's a small object sitting on a flat stone ledge. A lamp, yes, but one unlike any you've seen before. It's made not from stone or soapstone, but from a curved piece of whalebone. Carved smooth, polished by years of hands, and hollowed just enough to hold a thin puddle of oil. It's beautiful, in a way that sneaks up on you, understated, like something a child might pass down, then find again as an adult and still recognize. Reach toward it gently, tracing a finger along the grain of the bone. It's warm. Not from the flame, it hasn't been lit in hours, but from the residual body heat in the room, held in by turf and breath and wool and time. The wick is already in place. A narrow twist of moss, slightly charred at the end. You dip it into a nearby jar of oilseal fat, most likely, and light it from the hearth. The wick flares briefly, then settles into a steady burn. Instantly, this part of the room feels more alive. You notice now that the walls are lined with objects, carved pegs, hung tools, folded bundles of woolen cloth. All these details had been swallowed by shadow a moment ago, and now here they are, revealed by a single flame cupped in a piece of whalebone. You're struck, again, by the intimacy of Icelandic light. It's not designed to fill the room. It's designed to touch just enough of it to be useful. You don't light a lamp to show off your space. You light it to find your socks. And here's the thing. No two lamps in this house are the same. Some are carved from lava rock, the porous texture blackened with soot. Others are flat stones with shallow depressions chipped into their centers. A few are ceramic, clearly imported, and treated with great care. One even rests in a padded cradle of stitched hide, like a newborn goat. And then there are the odd ones. You see a lamp built from a ram's horn, its spiral turned upward and hollowed out at the base for oil. Another sits atop a cluster of river stones, the base balanced just so to keep it from tipping. Someone has carved runes into its edge. Nothing dramatic, just initials, maybe a date, maybe a silent request. Historians still argue about the extent to which Icelandic lamps were standardized. Some claim every farm had its own signature shape, a sort of household brand. Others believe most were improvised from whatever material was available: stone, bone, driftwood, or scrap. The truth, as ever, probably lies somewhere in the middle, but what can't be debated is the care behind them. Each lamp is more than a tool. It's a little act of defiance against the dark. A declaration that this house, however modest, however remote, will not go unseen. You sit near the whalebone lamp, watching how the light catches the soft weave of a woolen curtain. The shadows ripple gently as someone passes behind you. There. Presence revealed only by a momentary flicker on the stone wall. It's not quite shadow theater. It's quieter than that. A whisper of motion, marked only by light. There's something deeply restful in the way this light moves. It doesn't stab or dazzle, it suggests. You find yourself breathing slower, your shoulders easing. The world no longer feels like something to conquer, but something to be cradle-cupped in the hollow of a whalebone lamp. A child enters from outside, cheeks red with cold, boots crusted with frost. He nods at you as if to say, "Yes, I see you've discovered that one. It's a good one." He sets down a wooden bucket near the fire and takes a place on the floor, basking in the warmth and light. And suddenly you understand something profound. In this world, light isn't just about seeing. It's about gathering. People gather to the lamp like moths to a flame. Yes, but more than that, like family to a familiar song. A place to warm your hands, to soften your silence, to tell a story, to peel a root vegetable, to fix a bit of torn cloth. This whalebone lamp, humble as it is, has hosted 100 tiny acts of daily life. And not just here. All across Iceland, in every farmhouse, cottage, and shepherd's shelter, there would have been something like, "It's small, flickering, smoky, and essential." Pickle trots in, tail wagging slightly, and curls up beside the lamp. You reach down and rub his ears, your fingers brushing over the stiff edge of his knit shawl. He smells like wool and driftwood, and probably cod. He smells like this house. The flame burns on. The whalebone warms. And for a moment, there is nothing else you need. Afternoon, such as it is, has arrived in name only. The outside world remains cloaked in slate-gray dimness. A sky that seems to hover just inches above your head, pressing gently, reminding you to keep your expectations low and your lamp oil. You find yourself drawn to the back room of the turf house, a space narrower and lower than the main hall, likely used for storage or quiet work. There's less chatter here, less movement. Just a narrow bench, a low shelf, and a small lamp flickering patiently in the corner. But what catches your attention isn't the lamp itself. It's the book. A single volume, worn and browned, resting on a sloped wooden stand. Its pages are thick and uneven, flecked with tiny seeds and pressed hair homemade parchment, perhaps. And beside it, a bone-handled stylus, a chipped ink pot, and a sheep skull. Yes, a sheep skull, but not just any skull. This one has been hollowed. Out slightly, a divot carved into its forehead, the cavity darkened with soot and oil. There's a wick inside, smoldering. A lamp. You're looking at a study lamp, used not for working wool or carving spoons, but for reading. You sit on the bench, the wood creaking beneath you, and lean toward the book. The lamp emits a faint, fishy scent clearly fueled by a dab of cod oil or old tallow, but it's not overwhelming. Its light spills across the page like golden ink, catching the ridges of the parchment and illuminating the curling. Script in stark relief. This is how they read. How they copied prayers. How they recorded births. How they deciphered letters from distant relatives across the fjords. Not with a candle dripping romantic wax onto velvet cushions, but with a sheep skull filled with fat perched atop a rickety stand. Historians still argue how widespread literacy was in medieval Iceland. Some believe nearly every free man could read, thanks to the island's unique legal and religious traditions. Others argue that reading was confined to clergy and chieftains, with the occasional ambitious farmhand learning the basics. What's clear, however, is that books mattered, and light was precious enough to shape how and when you engaged with them. By this dim, flickering lamp, you try reading a line from the book. It's in Icelandic, of course Old Norse really, but the script is clear, if slanted. Your shadow falls across the page and you shift, remembering that lamp placement was a skill in itself. Too high and it casts glare. Too low and you read. In your own darkness, you imagine students learning in monasteries or farmsteads like this one. Their fingers stained with ink, eyes strained by poor lighting. They learn not just letters, but angles. How to tilt the book, how to prop the lamp, how to turn the page without upsetting the wick. There's something deeply tactile about this learning. No backlit screens, no crisp fonts. Just fat fire. And perseverance. And then there's the poetry. Iceland has a long tradition of verse riddles, epics, laments. Many of these were passed down orally, sung or chanted by firelight, but some were written. Composed by flickering sheep lamp, there. Rhythm shaped as much by meter as by how long the wick would last. You reach out and adjust the skull lamp slightly. It rocks gently on its base, the wick flaring for a moment before settling again. The shadows dance across the back wall, where carved runes mark the timber beams, perhaps names, perhaps prayers, perhaps just the medieval equivalent of doodles. During a boring sermon, behind you, someone hums softly. A girl's voice. She's spinning wool by hand, seated near another lamp, this one shaped from stone, its rim etched with a looping design. Her spindle turns slowly, rhythmically, matching. The cadence of her breath, she doesn't seem to notice you. Or perhaps she does and doesn't care. In this house, people float in and out of focus, always near but rarely interrupting. Everyone has something to do, and light makes it possible. And not just any light. This light. The sort of light that flickers, smokes, and leaves soot in your hair, yes, but also warms the fingers, quiets the mind, and anchors the moment. You look back at the sheep skull lamp and find yourself oddly moved. There's something deeply human about it, repurposing the remnants of survival into the tools of thought. A sheep feeds you, clothes you, warms your bed, and then lights your prayers. Nothing wasted. Everything transformed. You close the book. Gently, the lamp sputters once, and then teadies. Because, even now, it still has more to give. By now, you've grown used to the rhythms of the turf house. The crackle of lamps. The slow stretch of shadow across a stone wall. The comforting predictability of people moving from task to task, light to light. It's as if the house breathes not quickly, not loudly, but with a deep, slow inhale of something that knows how to last through winter. But tonight, there's something new. You're sitting near the back wall, knees tucked under a fur-lined blanket, sipping a cup of something warm that tastes vaguely like smoked thyme and wet stone. The tallow lamp in front of you burns low but steady, casting a buttery ring of light around your fingers. As you stretch your toes toward the fire pit, someone pulls back the curtain near the entryway. A gust of cold rushes in, along with a shimmer of moonlight reflected off snow. And suddenly you remember, the moon was always part of the lighting plan. You rise, tug your cloak tighter, and step out into the crisp night. The air slices across your cheeks, but your breath fogs gently, not violently. It's cold, yes, but manageable. Still, you don't linger long outside, just long enough to take in the landscape. The snow glows under the moon like a giant, sleeping animal. The hills are soft with frost. The sea is hidden behind darkness and rock, but you can hear its slow, sullen breathing. And overhead stars. So many stars. You stand there, eyes wide, until they adjust. And that's when you notice something remarkable. Everything is lit, just not by flame. The moonlight bounces off snowdrifts, dances along the icy edge of a wooden fence, and glints on the back of a sheep nosing around in the hay. There are no lamps out here, no cod oil, no tallow. Just reflection. Just light borrowed from the sky and bent by the earth. Historians still debate how much medieval Icelanders relied on natural night lighting. Some say moonlight and starlight were crucial navigation tools, especially in travel or herding. Others argue that the irregular weather clouds, snow, and long overcast spells made it unreliable. But all seem to agree, snow and moon were partners in visibility. You take another step forward and see the tracks of a fox leading across the hillside. They're not fresh, just faint outlines in the icy crust, but the fact that you can see them at all in the middle of the night is testament to the power of reflected light. Back inside, the household has grown quiet. The lamps have been trimmed for evening. The work is done. But no one is asleep yet. They're gathered near the hearth, low voices murmuring over mugs of warm skyr and bits of dried fish. One of the children is curled up near a stack of sheepskins, blinking slowly. Another is leaning close to a lamp, carving something into a piece of wood, perhaps initials or a bird or just lines to pass the time. And then it happens. The mother looks toward the window, just a membrane-covered hole in the turf wall in size. "Bright enough to see the cat tonight," she murmurs. Everyone nods. This isn't an unusual observation. It's a known phenomenon. When the moon is full and the snow is clean, you don't need a lamp to find your cat. It's the Icelandic version of checking if the lights are on. You settle in near the hearth again, now with a new appreciation for the way light filters into life here. There's no sharp distinction between natural and artificial. It's all just degrees of visibility. Sometimes your cod lamp guides your hands. Sometimes the snow does. You glance up and see one of the ceiling beams painted pale with reflected moonlight. The rest of the room remains in tallow glow, but that one beam gleams faintly like a washed bone in sand. A man sets down a stone bowl and rises. He opens a small hatch in the turf wall, a vent, really, no bigger than your face, and props it with a bit of driftwood. Cold air spills in, but so does the moonlight, soft and clean. It glides along the floor like a quiet dog nestling into the corners, brightening the sheepskull lamp even though it's unlit. You notice a faint carving near the hatch. Just a few words, scratched in with a pin or a knife. You can't read them in the dimness, but someone can. Someone probably does each night, because here, light is not a background element. It's the structure of experience, not just a utility, but a presence. Not just a flicker, but a shape. And now, with the moon high and the room calm, the rhythm shifts again. People begin to settle. Someone yawns. Someone else folds a bit of cloth. The last lamp is checked. A new wick added. A flame coaxed, not because it's needed, but because it's comforting. And as you pull your blanket tighter around your shoulders, you realize that even this moment, the soft hush before sleep, the faint creak of beams, the glow from one last open hatch is lit. Not brilliantly, but enough. Always just enough. You awaken sometime in the small hours, not because of noise or cold, but because your body simply decided to. There's no alarm, no rooster, no creaking door. Just your own slow breath, the warmth of wool, and the sense that the world is still. Turning gently outside. It's the in-between time again. This was a common part of Icelandic sleep, a period of waking that happened somewhere between first and second sleep, a pocket of night not feared or fixed, but folded into the rhythm of life. You lie there, half awake, while the lamp nearby glows faintly, its wick barely taller than a blade of grass. The light is still here. So is the night. You sit up quietly, not wanting to disturb Pickle, who's snoring faintly beneath a heap of sheepskin. The room is hushed but not silent. The soft ticking of cooling wood, the tiny hiss of a tallow flame, the distant whistle of wind threading through a crack in the turf wall. These sounds make up your midnight choir. You move to the small work table and find what you didn't expect. A pair of carved bone tweezers and a length of twisted linen thread. Someone's been repairing something. A shirt? A bag? A curtain? You can't tell. But the thread is still looped through the needle, paused mid-task. The lamp here, a squat stone bowl, burns lower than the others, its edges rimmed with soot. Its wick lying sideways like it's too tired to keep up appearances. You pick up the bone tweezers. They're smooth, light, and worn in the center where dozens of fingers have held them just so. It occurs to you that tools in this world aren't just instruments, they're inherited habits. Shapes passed down from hand to hand, shape not just by function but by time. Beside the tweezer sits a tiny bottle with a cork stopper. You pop it open. The scent is unmistakable. Lavender dot, it's lamp oil. Or more precisely, linen-scented lamp oil dot. Yes, people here didn't always settle for the raw, unfiltered stench of cod or mutton. Some experimented. Blended oils, infused herbs. A splash of lavender. A pinch of angelica root. Maybe not enough to mask the smell entirely, but just enough to add something sweet to the smoke. You pour a small amount into the waiting lamp and adjust the wick. It flares briefly, then eases into a gentle burn. The lavender scent is subtle, barely there, but it lingers in your nose, mixing with the ever-present aroma of wool and earth. Historians still argue whether these scented oils were acts of luxury or simple necessity, perhaps a way to push back against the dark, not just with light, but with beauty. Something to soften the hard edges of a winter night. To remind you that even in a place of moss and mud, you're allowed a bit of grace. You sit back down with the tweezers, not to fix anything, but just to hold them. Their weight in your hand. FEELS reassuring dot, and then, from across the room, a voice dot soft, mumbled. Someone muttering in sleep or half sleep, or that floating place in between. You glance over. It's the grandmother, her hair plaited and tucked beneath a shawl, her mouth moving slowly around old words. You don't understand the language, but you understand the shape. It's a prayer. A verse, maybe a memory. And though her eyes remain closed, her voice feels awake. You watch as the light from the lavender lamp casts faint patterns on the ceiling beams. The glow isn't strong, but it's just enough to see the silhouette of a hanging herb bundle, the curl of a drying sheepskin. The glint off a button sewn into a wool tunic. It's enough. You realize now that this house doesn't sleep so much as shift. One part rests while another stirs. One lamp dims while another flares. One person dozes while another prays. Light and dark move like tides through this place, never fully still, never fully gone. And you think about what it must have felt like. For the original builders of this house, those who first laid turf on stone, carved lamp bowls from lava, twisted moss into makeshift wicks. Did they wonder if anyone would still be tending flames centuries later? Did they believe the dark would win eventually? It hasn't. You're here, after all. You rise and move toward the entrance. You don't step outside, not yet. But you open. The wooden shutter just enough to glimpse the edge of the horizon. A faint silver blush is beginning to form, subtle. Like breath on glass. Morning. Or at least the idea of it. You close the shutter gently, careful not to disturb the sleeping house, and return to your bench. The lamp beside you flickers in quiet agreement. It too is ready to rest soon. You lie back beneath the firs, listening to the rhythms resume, the snore of a dog, the shift of a wooden bowl, the curl of smoke lifting toward the ceiling beams. Light was never meant to be bright, only steady, only enough. The sun, such as it is, has risen. It does not blaze or pour across the sky. Instead, it grazes, touching the upper tips of the turf roof and glancing off the distant mountains with all the enthusiasm of a sleepy goat. But it's enough to wake the house fully. You open your eyes to a soft gray-gold light trickling through the cracks in the shuttered window. The smell of breakfast barley porridge, salted fish, and something faintly smoky reaches you even before the sounds do. Lamp beside your sleeping nook has gone out. A curled thread of smoke drifts from the bowl, like the sigh of something well used and now at peace. You stretch, slowly, like someone testing the boundaries of a body not quite convinced it's morning yet. Your spine complains. Your hips creak. But your heart feels oddly full, and as you rise, you notice The room is not completely dark without the lamps. Pale light seeps in from the doorframe. A small fire has been rekindled in the hearth. Someone hums again, maybe the same girl who was spinning last night, her voice following the same rhythm even now. The entire house seems to exhale. You make your way toward the center room where the communal lamp is being cleaned. A young boy is scraping out the hardened residue from the base of a clay bowl. His fingers are already dark with soot, and he doesn't seem to mind. Beside him is a fresh wick braided tightly, ready for another day's duty. You help instinctively because here that's what you do. You take the old wick from him, drop it into a small bucket filled with ash and oil-soaked moss, and reach for a fresh pinch of sheep fat to press into the bowl's edges. The boy watches you with wide eyes, not because your actions are perfect, but because you're trying. Lighting a lamp here isn't just about light, it's about care, about continuity. This is a world where every act has weight, where waste is unthinkable and intention is everything, where even fire must be coaxed, not commanded. The wick is set. The fat softened. The bowl warms slightly beside the fire. You strike a flame carefully, deliberately, and a small spark dances into being. The flame catches, first small and unsure, then brighter, steadier. The boy claps once, quietly, as if celebrating without startling the moment. The room glows, and now breakfast begins in earnest. The family gathers, slowly like clouds forming. Each face bears the softness of just woken skin and eyes still adjusting to daylight. But there's laughter now, soft and low, the kind that rumbles rather than bursts. Someone jokes about how long the night felt. Someone else remarks that they dreamed of a whale made of firewood. Another wonders aloud if the neighbor's cow has learned to snore. These are not idle distractions. This is connection. You sit among them, wrapped in your wool shawl, a bowl of porridge warming your hands. The firelight and lamplight together form a kind of symmetry, one flickering in motion, the other pooled and golden, like honey spread across stone. You glance up and see the grandmother again, sipping broth and smiling with only half her mouth. She has survived more winters than you've eaten breakfasts, and still she stirs her lamp with care. You wonder how many lamps has she cleaned? How many nights has she guarded the wick? Historians still argue whether Iceland's remarkable storytelling traditions arose because of the darkness or despite it. Some say the long winters bred sagas the way wet logs breed moss. Others believe the stories were a form of resistance, light born of necessity. But maybe both are true. Maybe light and story were never separate. You finish your porridge and help clear the bowls. The dishes are wiped with a cloth, no water wasted. The ashes from the hearth will be sifted for usable bits of coal. Even the cooled lamp wicks, those charred stubs, will be tucked into a pouch, reused to start the next fire. Nothing disappears here. Everything circles back, and as you carry a bucket of melted snow to the side basin, you pass by the open door. Outside, the day has fully arrived, not bright, but present. A low sun skims the ridgeline. The grass is stiff with frost. The mountains wear clouds like shawls. You pause, letting the cold air kiss your cheeks. Your breath rises like lamp smoke, and in that moment, you feel what the lamps knew all along. You don't need brilliance. You just need enough warmth to wake the bones. Enough light to tell the next tale, enough presence to share a meal, and so you step back into the house, your body trailing mist, your hands warm from the bucket, your mind lit from within. The lamp flickers beside you, ready for what comes next. Later in the day, the lamps are cleaned again, this time not out of urgency, but out of rhythm. Everything here moves in rhythms. The tides of light, the arc of the sun, the chores that circle like the seasons. You join in not because you're asked, but because that's how belonging works here. You're handed a rag that smells faintly of vinegar and old wool. and a small clay jar filled with crushed soapwort. The residue clinging to the inside of a lamp bowl is stubborn, gummy from hours of slow burning. You scrape it gently, careful not to chip the fragile lip of the vessel. The black flakes come away like flakes of an ancient story being told in reverse. Beside you, a teenage girl sings while she works, her voice half song, half sigh. The melody loops like a lullaby stitched from memory. She doesn't look at you while she sings, but you feel the sound settle in your ribs. It's not a performance, it's a way to pass the time, to pace the motion of her hands, to push back gently against the quiet that waits to creep in if left unchallenged. Outside, the day is dimming again. The sun never fully rose, not in the way you're used to, and now it's sinking back behind the low hills with an almost apologetic shrug. You hear the creak of the wooden shutter being pulled closed. A practiced hand cuts off the outside world. One panel at a time, the room becomes its own universe again. You think back to the first lamp you saw when you arrived, a simple moss wick in a carved soapstone bowl. It seemed primitive then. Now, it feels essential. There's elegance in its simplicity, strength in its endurance. A kind of honesty that glows without boasting. You lift the now clean lamp to your face and breathe in. There's still a trace of the last burn, faintly fishy, yes, but with a whisper of something sweeter beneath. Maybe herbs. Maybe memory. Someone brings in the moss. It's fresh, damp, and fragrant, braided into neat coils. You're told this batch was collected from the northern slope, where the sunlight filters through pine needles and the air is sharper. Moss from that side burns slower, smokes less. You nod, as if you've always known this, as if your body is already half made of peat and lichen and low firelight. Historians still argue whether moss was chosen out of necessity or preference. Some claim it was the only viable wick. Others say it was prized for its slow, even burn and the way it held scent. Either way, it remains centuries later the soft spine of the Icelandic night. You help press the moss into place, shaping the coil like a tiny snail curled in a sunlit shell. A drop of oil follows. The lamp is reborn. And now comes the quiet. The long, warm, firelit quiet that happens just before night reclaims everything. You sit near the hearth, your back against the stone, your feet tucked into the edge of a woven rug. Around you, people settle into their evening patterns, mending, spinning, whispering, watching. One child is carving a piece of bone with astonishing focus. Another is tracing letters into a thin slate, the chalk squeaking softly with each loop. Pickle, the dog, has returned to his preferred position, draped sideways across the threshold like an exceptionally relaxed sentry. You smile. You breathe. You listen. Someone asks for a story. The oldest person in the room clears their throat and leans forward. No script, no grand gestures, just a voice, weaving itself into the glow of the room. The story begins. It's about a man who swallowed a lamp and became a star. You don't question it, because in this moment, in this light, anything feels possible. The story unspools in a spiral like the moss in the bowl, like the wick being pulled gently into flame. You watch as the room leans forward, caught in the quiet grip of shared imagination. Shadows dance across the beams, across faces, across folded hands. You're not just listening. You're glowing. And though the story's ending is both odd and unresolved, as most good tales are, no one seems to mind. The teller simply leans back, exhales, and lets the silence return. You rise once more to tend the lamp near your sleeping space. You press the moss down gently, adjust the wick, and murmur thanks not out loud, but in the silent way of people who understand that even light deserves gratitude. As you settle in, layers of wool folding around your limbs, you glance toward. The wall. Your shadow is there. Faint. Flickering. Real. You think of how many shadows have danced in this very room, of how many generations have slept upright, half tilted toward the ceiling, kept company by the same glow you now bask in, and in the very last seconds before sleep claims you, you wonder, was it really just light? Or was it memory made visible? You drift, you breathe, you burn steady. And now the lamps have dimmed. The room has stilled. The fire in the hearth has collapsed into a quiet cradle of embers, pulsing like a heartbeat. Even Pickle has gone silent, curled in a tight little coil, ears twitching gently in dreams. You lie back fully now, no longer propped, no longer posing. The soft cradle of wool beneath you shifts ever so slightly with each breath, like a small boat rocking on a still black lake. There is nothing left to do, no wick to trim, no moss to prepare, no story waiting to be told, just breath. Just the faint warmth of your own skin. Just the knowledge that here, in this quiet, you are safe. Your mind might drift to other nights, other lamps, other silences, but the weight of this place holds you. Gentle, sure, anchored not by force, but by presence. And as your eyes grow heavier and your muscles soften, you let yourself sink not into darkness, but into glow. Into the soft hush of a world that has mastered the art of just enough light. The stories are done for tonight. The flames have done their part. Now it's your turn to rest. Let the past hold you. Let the quiet carry you, and sleep.